We booked a campground for the first weekend in October. The idea was to camp with some friends, view the amazing New England fall foliage, and to visit the Freiburg Fair in Maine. Our friends found a campground in North Conway, New Hampshire called Saco River Family Camping, and it's only about 15 minutes from the fairgrounds, unless, of course, you count traffic, and then it was closer to an hour. We got an email from the campground about a month prior to our arrival date saying that they were having a Halloween site decorating contest. And I really miss decorating the house, so we jumped at the opportunity. The concept in my head was an abandoned RV, add a monster, some ghosts, a scary skull, the average gateway to hell sort of thing. For the creature, I wanted to recreate a grumble that I had done several years ago, and I had gotten that idea from spookyblue.com. The papier-mâché paste I use for it is made of equal parts water and glue with a bit of flour as a thickener. You dip your newspaper strips into it and apply that to a chicken wire frame. I ended up with a vaguely reptilian head shape that I decided to pursue instead of going with the grumble, and then I opted to add some huge horns on it for a more threatening look. I use shop towels in some areas for added strength. That's the blue there. And I started experimenting with spray foam to add more facial details. I would do a layer, sculpt it a bit, add more foam to fill in the holes in the first layer, and then trim that down too. I highly recommend using Loctite spray foam. It is much better than the Great Stuff brand. Much easier to shape. Check out Stilt Beast Studios on YouTube for tons of pointers and ideas. I went with shop towels for the horns, pushing them into ridges, and glass cabochons for eyes. I then used monster mud for better coverage, strength, and detail across the head. I mixed the mud to roughly the thickness of frosting, though it would be far easier to apply if more watery. As it was, I found it easier to sort of paint it onto the shop towels rather than trying to saturate and then wring them out. Here, I'm using a paint stirrer to push wrinkles into the towel. This is exactly the same process I had used on the horns. And the method for creating nostrils was closer to sculpting with clay, pinching and pushing the pieces into place, then smoothing the edges out to blend them. Yet another technique I used was painting on the mud, then applying a shop towel and painting on only the top side of it. Here I'm trying to make a series of bony ridges down the forehead. I ended up not being very happy with where this was headed, so it's easy to reset and start over just by lifting it up. In this clip, I'm simply painting on monster mud to hide seams and textures that I didn't want. The teeth and gums are made from foam clay, as are the eye sockets. I originally went too thick and everything deformed under its own weight, requiring me to adjust them often as they dried. Learning my lesson, I then used aluminum foil as a base and spread a thin layer of foam clay over top of that. And this is the final result just prior to painting. I chose a base layer of brown and a dirty ivory on the horns. This was accomplished through Krylon ivory spray paint as a base, with brown dry brush spotting over top of that. This was immediately followed with a wet brush to make it more like a wash, and finally paper towels to remove much of it. I created imperfections in the teeth with a Dremel wheel, and then highlighted those with dark paint. I controlled the look with water and a rag, very similar to what I'd done on the horns. I followed these dark spots on the teeth with a plaque-like yellow-brown wash. This is the final result after a semi-gloss polyurethane has been applied to help protect it. I began with painting that on, but ended up using a spray-on version instead due to all the textures and ridges all over the thing. To help sell the idea that there was more to the monster, I wanted to create at least one leg. I tried using monster mud directly over the chicken wire, but ended up reverting to the paper mache method instead. I followed the same procedure with the monster mud over the paper mache like I'd done on the head. And then I wanted to add some nasty fingernails, so I formed some aluminum foil as a base, shaping the talons into a cup that I could then glue onto the ends of the fingers. Wrapping the foil in black foam clay and then painting it brown almost matched the rest of the leg. And then finally I added some foam clay in the shape of fingernails. In the past, I used this type of insulation board to create impressively realistic boards. Made of foam, these are light enough to easily hang on windows and doors without stressing them. This year I tried this foam instead, primarily because it came in small panels and cost much less. This foam is much harder to paint a simulated wood grain onto due to its rough top surface. So instead, I opted to glue some plywood on top. Fortunately, this particular underlayment or plywood came with a very nasty back surface, which was perfect for what I needed. Once the boards were cut and glued, I used a combination of paints to give them a weathered and trashy look. Mostly this was black spray paint and spray varnish. I painted the sides just to keep them from being stark white, and maybe at night someone would be fooled into thinking that they're real boards. Maybe. I'm definitely going back to the pink insulation boards next time. I used painter's tape on the floor to define the width of my door when gluing the boards together. I then used carpet tacks with pre-drilled holes to simulate nails, and finally I added some paint streaks for realism. 3D printed a plastic straw to prevent the wire from cutting into. Then we 3D printed these door hangy thingies. This gives us a hook on the screen door that we can then hang the boards from. Not shown here, but in the end I used some very old and very well used plastic drop cloths behind the boarded up doors for a spooky. I don't really have much to say about these curtains, except that we totally could have skipped them. The RV windows are tinted too much to really see these, so I totally could have skipped doing them. We hung an old shower curtain over one of the windows and then projected a spooky video onto it. Here are some sites you can download video from. They have both free and non-free options. I also borrowed a good bit from YouTube. I use HIT Film to assemble the video segments, add transitions, remove backgrounds, and combine scenes to make them scarier. We painted on top of clear vinyl strips to add grunge to the trailer. We also stuck on some bullet hole and claw mark decals. The windy day made spider webbing quite challenging, as did my forgetting to bring our tall ladder. We hung black cloth along the front to conceal the fog machine, the strobe light, and where the creature's body would be. This is the most true-to-life view of the video projection. All the other pictures of it wildly distort the color, clarity, and brightness of it. We had 2 colored lights and a black light set on an interval timer. The fog machine was also set to fire in intervals, although that was with the built-in timer. I used a free mixing software called Audacity to create a scary audio track comprised of over 30 different audio sources and set to play on a loop through outdoor speakers.